Thank you so much, Ariel, and thank you, Chris, for being here. Can you all hear me? Yeah, great. Okay. I'm so excited to be here with you. I read this book this week. I always want to put it off until just before we talk, so everything is fresh in my mind. And I often I may just ask you questions off the cuff, but I actually have such good questions that I wrote down that I don't want to forget, that I may be reading some of them to you as well. We're also glad you're here. So of course you're from Vermont, but you're in the middle of a big book tour right now.
I am. First of all, Ariel, thank you for that lovely introduction. Jennifer, thank you for all that you do on behalf of libraries. Huge thanks as well to Kate, to Alice, and of course, Christina, you're just amazing. I'm a huge Christina Baker Kline fan. If you haven't read The Exiles, The Orphan Train, you must.
I paid him before.
This is my 35th book tour. I've had more book tours than books because of the paperback book tours, and so I'm utterly thrilled to be in New Jersey tonight.
I have actually been grilling him about this whole being on the road thing as a man. He has 2 suits, he has 7 shirts, 3 ties, enough underwear that sometimes gets lost, we were just discussing.
It does. Not because of my own incompetence. I do keep a close eye on my underwear on book tours. Okay, I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest condensed version. Once on a book tour, I had 2 nights in a hotel in Minneapolis because I wanted to send out my clothes because it was a 3-week book tour. So I come back to my hotel on Saturday night, and there in the bed are all of my shirts, beautifully pressed, and a box with my underwear. I open it up, planning to move my underwear in one neat and tidy brick from the box on the bed into my suitcase on the floor, and I open up the box, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and in there are 11 pairs of underwear, not mine, not a man's. Now,
That's the beginning of a novel, I told you. That's what we agreed at the beginning.
the laundry is closed at a hotel on a Saturday night and Sunday. So when I'm checking out Sunday morning to go to my next stop on the tour, I say to the guy behind the desk, okay, when your laundry opens on Monday, if you find my underwear, here's the hotel in Orlando, Florida. I will be out on Tuesday, and if you could send it, I'd be grateful. And he looked at me like, yeah, that's going to happen. But sure enough, I get to Orlando, Florida on Tuesday, and there's a Federal Express box waiting for me at the check-in desk. I cradle it against my chest, bring it up to my hotel room, and I open it up with great excitement. And in there are 11 pairs of underwear, not mine. But this time, they were a man's. And they were boxers.
And they fit.
And they fit. So I did the last week of that book tour in a strange man's underwear. My life is so damn glamorous.
Okay, so as you can already sense, Chris is the hardest working man in showbiz. Not only is he on this tour at the moment, but he's already finished his next book that is coming out next year, so we are going to get back to that. All of these details are really fun, and I actually have some more granular questions, but I do think we need to move on to the book. Let's talk about it. Okay, so how many of you in the room have read the book, just so I have a sense of you? That's perfect, because lots of you have a lot of wonderful things to look forward to. So I think we should start. As you've heard, it is a book that takes place during the Civil War in Virginia. Chris, do you want to do a little intro about it?
Sure. The Jackal's Mistress had its origins way back in 2003. An editor at Reader's Digest named Gary Sledge called me up and said, Chris, you live in Vermont. Would you be willing to write an article about a small anecdote, a true story involving a Vermonter, an abolitionist? And I said, sure. So I researched this story, and here's the bare bones of it. An abolitionist in the Vermont Brigade has most of his leg blown off and most of a hand blown off in the Shenandoah Valley in 1864. Surgeons amputate what's left of his leg, and he's left to die. But he doesn't die. He is found by 2 formerly enslaved people and the wife of a rebel soldier who is somewhere in a Union POW camp. And these 3 grown-ups make this decision. If it were the rebel woman's husband, wounded, dying in Maryland or Pennsylvania, we would want a Yankee woman, coarse as she might be, to keep him alive. And so they move heaven and earth to heal him, hide him, and then try and bring him across the Confederate lines to the Union garrison in Harper's Ferry. It is an act of unbelievable courage and heroism and arguably lunacy, because this is a part of the Shenandoah Valley in which John Mosby's Confederate Rangers and Jubal Early's Confederate Army still reign supreme. Hiding a Yankee blue belly abolitionist is a death sentence, but they do it. So I researched the story, and it ran in Reader's Digest in October 2003, and I really didn't think about it again for years. I wasn't writing historical fiction in 2003. I was writing books like The Buffalo Soldier and Transistor Radio and Midwives. Cut to 2022. I'm on the Lioness book tour, and I'm in Richmond, Virginia. And you feel the weight of history and the Civil War in Richmond, Virginia, in ways you never do in Vermont. In Vermont, the only Civil War dust-up we had was a botched bank robbery at the Canadian border, with no gunshots fired and no one hurt. Richmond is different. And in 2022, it was only 2 years since the statues of the treasonous Confederate generals and Jefferson Davis had finally been taken down. And it seemed to me in 2022, if we ever needed a book about how two wildly different, divergent worldviews could figure it out, if we ever needed a book about healing, it was then. And now it's 2025, and I think we need that book even more than we needed it in 2022.
Yeah, for sure. You're reminding me, I was in Richmond on book tour just before George Floyd, and the woman who was driving me around, we went down the main corridor.
Was this for the Exiles?
This was for, the Exiles was during COVID, so this was actually for the previous book, A Piece of the World. And we were driving down the main corridor and all the statues were still up. And in fact, there was a Confederate flag on one of the buildings, and she was very defensive about it. But that changed very quickly, actually. But I was thinking about all of this as I was reading your book, because there are so many complicated pitfalls that you, as a northerner, right, a blue belly yourself, and I want you to explain what that term means, by the way, but that you had to sort of grapple with as you were, I'm sure, writing the book, and I'm curious about that, about number one, well, I'll get to that second. I guess my second question is really taking on the Civil War, because people who care about the Civil War care a lot about the Civil War, and have deep expertise. So taking it on as one of your 35 novels, one of your 25 novels, is a very complicated undertaking. So there's that, and then there's the question of North and South, and I'm curious about both.
Let's start with North and South. We know very little about the actual events of September 1864 involving a Vermonter who lost a leg named Henry Bedell and a Southern woman who helped save his life named Betty Van Meter. We know only the names of the two other adults living with her in the Shenandoah Valley, the two formerly enslaved adults, Dick and Ginny Runner, and we don't even know the name of Betty's 10-year-old niece. We just know there was a niece. Almost all that we know exists in the Middlebury College archives, and this is just, look, I'm going to digress for one moment.
No, please.
Because I love the fact that most of what we know about this story comes from the Middlebury College valedictorian class of 1862, who by 1864 is already a lieutenant colonel because the attrition is so high in the Union Army among officers. He wrote in his 1869 book, The Vermont Brigade in the Shenandoah Valley, what he calls an episode. It's an 8-page parenthetical about a guy he knows named Henry Bedell, who was left for dead and somehow is resurrected months later in Harper's Ferry, and how he wound up there is hearsay for Aldous Walker, but he learns more and more about it. And one of the fun facts about Aldous Walker I find fascinating is this. He doesn't tell you one detail that I find really interesting, and it is this. Henry Bedell lived because another officer, found him with his leg blown off on the battlefield and applied a tourniquet using Bedell's canteen cord. That soldier was Aldous Walker. And you don't learn that from Aldous Walker's account because he's so weirdly 19th century modest. You learn that detail in a letter written after the war by somebody else. So, North and South. When I saw this was the germ of a novel, I realized we know nothing about it, really. I knew enough to write 4,000 words for Reader's Digest, and that was everything we knew. So I licensed to make it a more epic story about the North and South with the important kinds of messaging that really matters. I could make it a love story. I view this as a Civil War Romeo and Juliet, which is one of the reasons why I renamed the characters, because in real life, we have no reason to believe that Vermonter Henry Bedell and Virginian Betty Van Meter were ever lovers. In my novel, spoiler alert, there's a chance they're going to be. Which is why they are christened Jonathan Weybridge and Libby Stedman. And here are two Easter eggs. I live in Weybridge, Vermont, and Libby Stedman was a remarkable woman in the church I went to for years in Lincoln, Vermont, and she died in 2022, and I said to her earlier, when I knew her, you've got the best name. I hope someday I write a book with a heroine worthy of the name Libby Stedman. And of course, she's the heroine in the Jackal's Mistress. So I do view this as a novel about North and South, with most of the messaging coming from the niece, who's named Jubilee in the book, and she's 12 years old. And the reason why she can be the messenger is because I love kids with no filters. I love smart Alex, and I love teenagers who will tell the grown-ups in the room the truth that the grown-ups won't admit to themselves.
I was just going to say, she's the truth teller in your book. Yeah. You're able to use her so you're able to dispatch her so well, because she'll just say anything.
And she has so many grievances.
Yeah.
She's aggrieved because they're hiding a blue belly. By the way, blue belly is a Southern derisive term for Yankees. That's all it means. In any case, Jubilee, the 12-year-old niece, is angry because her aunt is behaving like a crazy person, trying to heal and hide a Yankee blue belly, and she's hiding him in her bedroom, so that all of a sudden Libby has to move into Jubilee's bedroom, so suddenly this 12-year-old girl doesn't even have her bedroom anymore, and because the guy is missing most of his hand and a leg, can do nothing to earn his keep, so she has to change his slop jars and cut his meat, what they have, and feed him, and so she is awash, infuriated. She's the one who christens him the Jackal. But as their relationship grows and they begin to talk more and more, she begins to see both his hypocrisy and her aunt's hypocrisy.
So I can see why you ended up making the hint of a relationship, because to deal with nonfiction material where a Confederate wife is saving, and at great peril to herself and to everyone on the property, she's housing and hiding this soldier from the North, doesn't make sense on the surface of it. How did you grapple with that fact? Like, how did you sort of see your way into who these characters were?
Well, part of it begins with the one letter we have from Betty Van Meter. In 1914, the state of Vermont gave her a commendation toward the end of her life for saving the son of the Green Mountains, for saving Henry Bedell. And when she was writing the governor of Vermont to thank him, she said, I was only doing what I think any woman would do, knowing that her husband might be dying far from home. She viewed it like karma.
But he was the enemy.
He was the enemy, but she was unwilling to let him die alone. There has been so much death, and she's witnessed so much death because she's in a part of the Shenandoah Valley near Winchester, which there's a reason why the 1864 Battle of Winchester is called the Third Battle of Winchester. That is one more time than we fought at Bull Run even. And Winchester is literally 5 miles from her house. She spent the entire war wondering when her property was going to become a battlefield. She spent most of the war trying to feed the Confederate Army, which was always showing up for flour from her grist mill, while she herself and her niece and Dick and Ginny Runner are practically starving to death. It was one of those selfless decisions that you want to celebrate.
Yeah.
Somebody saying, I'm going to do the right thing come hell or high water.
Yeah, that's so great. And also the fact that it really happened gives you all kinds of license. I mean, it's this, you know how, as they say, truth is stranger. So then in fiction, how do you take that true thing and make sense of it? I think that's what good fiction does, is to make sense of things that don't seem to make sense.
Most Civil War historians are men my age. And I interviewed a lot of them for this book, but 4 of them I spent a lot of time with. 3 of them had never heard the story, so I had to tell them the story. But all of them said to me the same thing. In one word, do you think those 2 were lovers? I don't. Well, they couldn't have been lovers, it was the wrong time. And yet, how beautiful would it be if in this innermost room of Dante's Inferno, they found a modicum of hope from each other.
I love that he's a professor and she's thirsty for knowledge. So you've really got this sort of, he's a very interesting person, he's thoughtful. You've got this relationship developing through the book that makes sense as you read. In the author's note at the end, I want to talk about research. You just talked about the 4 historians. You've read a lot. You read a lot of books. You write books almost every year. So how did you undertake research for the book? How did you know when to stop? Because the Civil War research is endless. You could read forever. And then have people questioned any of your facts? I know that you had people read the manuscript, but what was that process like? Yeah.
You know this from your historical fiction. There are certain stages and certain steps in the process. For a book about the Civil War, I began by reading a lot of the histories, of which there are many, focusing on the Shenandoah Valley. Then I moved on to the primary sources. There are so many letters and so many memoirs that you can read, and I focused a lot on the Shenandoah Valley, the Vermont Brigade, and the Army of Northern Virginia. Then I interviewed historians, including a really delightful guy named Ken Borey, who's a family physician, but is also an expert on Civil War medicine. And I went to his house, and we had a great lunch, and for finishing lunch, he said to me, want to come to the basement and see my bone saws? And I immediately thought, oh, you're in Stephen King's Misery now. You've changed books. But so I went down in the basement, and I saw his bone saws, and then you do the ultimate primary research, you go to the sites. So I began at the Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, Maryland, which is essentially rows of mannequins that don't have legs or arms. And then I went from there to Harper's Ferry. I went through the Shenandoah Valley, Third Battle of Winchester, Berryville, where Betty Van Meter lived, and into Richmond, because I assumed at this point in the book that I was going to move back and forth in time. I envisioned it being set predominantly in 1864, but having a lot of scenes in 2020, when all of those statues are coming down in Richmond. And why are those interstitial pages gone? I will tell you. In 2023, in April, my lovely bride Victoria is with me. She takes a photograph of me in Harper's Ferry, so I can post it with one of those unbelievably tawdry, I'm too old for this, sleazy self-promotion images. Hi, I'm in Harper's Ferry having a great time researching a book. We all do. And somebody commented, "Hi, Chris. We've never met. I'm doing some work this morning for ChatGPT," and I said, "Why is Chris Bohjalian in Harper's Ferry?" And here is what ChatGPT said. Chris Bohjalian, late 20th, early 21st century novelist, is known for historical fiction, thrillers, and books about, quote-unquote, social issues. If Chris is in Harper's Ferry, he's likely writing a book about the Civil War, but one that moves back and forth in time between the Civil War and the present, perhaps including the summer of 2020 when the statues of the Confederate generals were taken down in Richmond. And I looked at that and thought, I am so predictable that fledgling AI is a step ahead of me. And so I looked at all those interstitial pages that I'd written and said, you know what? Keep it in 1864.
Would you ever publish those somewhere else? Those sound interesting, actually.
They were interesting.
Yeah.
But I think they were interesting for you and me, going back to your question, what is the research you don't use?
Yeah.
I think that the stuff that's really interesting is research, and might inform the messaging and the narrative, but doesn't need to be in the narrative, especially when I was so focused on 4 adults and 1 tween.
When you were doing all this research, were you writing at the same time? What is your process like?
I'm going to ask you the same question. I'll usually spend maybe 2 or 3 weeks before I start writing a book, reading about the subject, to make sure that it is viable and plausible, and I'm as interested in it 3 weeks later as I was when I had the epiphany on my bike on the afternoon and say, I should write a novel about this. And 3 weeks later I'm still excited about it, it might be worth pursuing. And so I will start writing. And then I will continue to research as I write. So by the time I went to Virginia, I had a rough draft of the novel.
Wow. Did you change a lot?
I did. I changed certain details for topography. I changed a lot of Libby Stedman's concerns about the war when I really saw the proximity of where her house was to all of these battles in the Shenandoah, and what it is like to be a 22 to 25-year-old woman with a 10-year-old niece, 2 formerly enslaved people who become your closest friends in the world, and other than that, you are completely on your own in a world filled with Confederate guerrillas, Confederate soldiers, and because you are living with formerly enslaved people, you are already suspect in the eyes of all of the white Southerners in the community. Oh, and my gosh, and in real life, this woman in the novel isn't even from Berryville, she's from Charlottesville, which is as far away in, back in 1864 as probably, Princeton, New Jersey, and Albany, New York, in terms of how long it takes to get back and forth.
Right. How did you avoid having a revisionist historical perspective where you're overlaying our concerns and, assumptions? How did you strip that from the story?
Your questions are so good. My tween, Jubilee. Jubilee is able to say the things that the grown-ups say. Jubilee can say things that if they come out of the mouths of Jonathan Waybridge or Libby Stedman or Joseph or Sally would sound like 2025 linguistics in 1864. But a 12-year-old with a chip on her shoulder will say anything.
Did you have any concern about dialect, language, the way you identify people? Did you have sensitivity readers? Did you sort of have to put a close lens on that?
I did. And I did have sensitivity readers. I requested sensitivity readers, as I did with The Lioness, which is about neocolonialism and racism in the Serengeti in 1964. And did anyone here see I played the club at the George Street Playhouse? Thank you. For my sensitivity readers piece for the club, which is a play kind of like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf meets Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. So it was really important to me that I am not putting my preconceptions of language into these characters, and that it is as authentic as it can possibly be.
Were there any really surprising or useful responses you got?
I got lots, yeah. I don't know how much you want to go behind the sheetrock to see the
Just,
plumbing.
I think it's interesting to sort of consider what it means to write a novel about the Civil War today,
Yeah.
and how you use language and, as I said, dialect and conversation and everything.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you one really clear example. There's a scene where Libby Stedman and Jonathan Waybridge are talking about books. And they're talking about two books in particular. Uncle Tom's Cabin and the Southern rebuttal novel, Altars of Sacrifice. And when I was writing about having two adults who are both very literate, talking about those two books, I was really clear in my mind that I wasn't going to quote passages. A, because I don't think it's plausible that they would have the passages in mind years after reading the book. Even though Altars of Sacrifice was published in 1863. But I was really careful in that scene that I wanted them to be talking about the books in important ways that message what's unbelievably offensive, but not use the unbelievably offensive words.
So was that something that the reader pointed out, or something that you were already aware of?
I was already aware, but actually the sensitivity reader encouraged me to be more ferocious in my dialogue. But I didn't want to go there. There's certain things I won't do in 2025 that I might have done in the year 2000 as a novelist. For example, in the year 2000, I published a transgender love story. And it was a Lambda Literary Award finalist, and I was on the cover of the only magazine for the LGBTQ community at the time that focused on male to female trans community members, transgender tapestry. But I wouldn't write that book now either.
You wouldn't?
I would not. I would think that that's a story that needs to be told by trans voices.
You do write about women.
I do.
So you have, I think every writer probably has lines or places that they choose not to go. But you have got a lot of books. You've got a lot of places. You were saying...
And some are so bad.
Well, I love that you said that, actually. We were at dinner, and he was saying that, tell them the Tom Hanks thing.
Oh. Tom Hanks once said, well, I made a lot of movies, 5 are pretty good. And that's how I feel about my books. I've written, 25 books, 26 counting the book that comes out next year, and 2 or 3 more that will never be published because they're just so terrible. And of those 25 published ones, 5 are pretty good.
Okay, let's talk about the 5. What are the 5 in your mind?
Okay. Off the top of my head, and I really...
Midwives?
I think I would put Midwives. I've been really prolific since the pandemic. I mean, since March of 2020, I finished Hour of the Witch, I wrote The Lioness, I wrote The Princess of Las Vegas, I wrote The Jackal's Mistress, I wrote The Amateur, and I wrote The Club. That's a lot of books in a play in a short period of time, and some are better than others. I think my historical fiction books are better than my thrillers.
Interesting.
So I had to pick 5. I'm going to go with Hour of the Witch.
Which was a big hit.
Yeah. The Lioness. Midwives. The Sandcastle Girls.
Okay.
And if I were to put one non-historical fiction in there, and when I wrote Midwives, it wasn't historical fiction. It is now.
Yeah.
I might put The Red Lotus, which was a book that no one in this room has read, because it was published, there's one. It was published March 17th, 2020. No one in Greece.
Terrifying.
What?
What do you say the
Because I know the sales figures, and I got such sweet notes from my friends who have bookstores in May and April saying, oh my gosh, we're unpacking the books that came in mid-March, and there's the Red Lotus. We'll try and sell some.
Chris, so I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to open it up. I want to know why you have been, can you believe we're done already? Is that amazing? Doesn't it seem fast, maybe? I want to know why you've written so many books since the pandemic. What is going on with you?
Not me, I think it's all of us. We're in the midst of this wonderful post-pandemic literary renaissance. This one was really driven home to me in 2021. Whenever we think of the last pandemic, 1918 to 1920, we think of immediately what followed. Jazz, gin, dancing. I didn't wait for the end of the pandemic to rediscover gin. And of course, this unbelievable literary renaissance. Fitzgerald, Faulkner, Hemingway, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, Catherine Ann Porter, Richard Wright. It's a very long list. And whenever we think of them, we always attribute their voice to the mechanized carnage of World War I. Certainly I did. But in 2021, I reread Catherine Ann Porter's Pale Horse, Pale Rider, a beautiful novella about the influenza pandemic. And there's a scene when the two young lovers, Adam and Miranda, are standing on the front steps of their Colorado boarding house as one horse-drawn hearse after another clops past. And Miranda says to Adam, it's like a plague. It's like a plague. Because, of course, it was. And that was what really clicked. That of all those writers I just mentioned, the only one who saw anything that resembled combat was Hemingway in July of 1918 when he was wounded as a volunteer ambulance driver. And that's when I realized that all of those writers witnessed the pandemic. Not World War I, the pandemic. And in 2021 and 2022, we've seen all these amazing books, Demon Copperhead and Chain Gang All-Stars and Tom Lake and what I think is one of the most beautiful rom-com books ever, Curtis Sinfield's romantic comedy, which is the best love story ever we're going to get to come out of a pandemic. My editor, great friend Jenny Jackson, wrote her incredible first novel, Pineapple Street, in lockdown. In the spare moments between taking care of her little boy or little girl or trying to do her job as an editor. And all of that productivity, I think, is because of the way we were changed by the pandemic. None of us are precisely the same people we were in 2019, either because of people we know who died, or because we got COVID, or because we lived in lockdown, or because our kids can't do math, or because, there's so many reasons. We are scarred and different, and in some ways, potentially better people. Softer, gentler. One of the things I lost to COVID, and I'm so glad I lost it, is my filter. I have literally no filter. I'm so glad.
This is true.
I read Transistor Radio when it came out, so my recollection is I just loved the book, and I think now would be a great time for it, but do you not feel that now?
And what's your name?
My name's Amy.
Hi, Amy. I'm very proud of Transistor Radio, and I think this is an important time for us to be discussing trans voices and trans issues, but I would not write that book myself now. I'm thrilled if people read it. I'm even more thrilled if people read novels about the trans community written by the trans community.
Thank you.
It's a great question.
Hello, I'm Anjali. Thank you so much for coming.
Hi, Anjali.
Montclair. I was fascinated by the fact that AI knew you so well, so I'd love to hear if you've tried AI for writing, if it sounds like you, what do you think about authors that use AI? Sorry, that was too many questions. AI.
It was sort of one question, really, with like multifoliate branches.
Yeah.
Ariel, what a great use of the word multifoliated. I love librarians. They're so, I'm a novelist because of librarians and libraries. What do I think of AI? It terrifies me. I've never used it. I don't even use Scrivener. I am such a Luddite. I still use Microsoft Word for Apple, and I edit my books by hand with fountain pens. So whenever I'm sent, even now, by Doubleday, a manuscript, is in either a Google Work doc or with track changes on it, I literally print it out and then write in all my changes by hand, and then send that back to the production manager. The closest I've come to AI is this. AI, I don't remember which of the ones it was, used 11 of my books to train the system to write novels. And when I saw the 11 of my books that were used, I posted that image and expressed my discomfort with it. And that is as close as I come to AI. I am creeped out when, for example, yesterday, I needed to Google something about Soul Cycle for a book I am writing now. And instead of getting a list of sites, now of course you get the AI 2 or 3 paragraphs, and I watch it unfold on my screen and I'm thinking, the robots are coming, I'm doomed.
You ever want to talk about Soul Cycle, I'm here.
Angelique, I do. Okay, let's talk. Are you a trainer, or are you
Just a consumer
Okay,
participant, yeah.
great, thank you.
Hi Chris, I'm Emily,
Hi, Emily.
and just apparently the only person in this room who bought and read The Red Lotus.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it very much, but it was terrifying. What did you think, not just about, oh, it's coming out, that this isn't a great time for book publication necessarily, for having things promoted, but what did you think in terms of what the subject matter was and what time it was when it came out? Did you just go, oh crap?
Can you talk about the subject?
Yeah. What is The Red Lotus about? The Red Lotus is about a biological pathogen in a race against time to prevent a worldwide pandemic. It is from the perspective of a young ER doctor in New York City and an elderly Armenian private detective in New York City who have no idea that it is about a biological pathogen, but you as the readers know this very early on, the pathogen coming from a North Korean virus laboratory. And I won't tell you how it ends, but some of my books are darker than others, and this might be one of the darkest endings ever. But I love the book. I'm really proud of the book. And my big concern with the book was this. Rats. There are a lot of rats in the book, because the book had its origin when I came across this weird study that showed how rats in Vietnam in 1999, or maybe it was 2009, weighed 2 ounces more than rats weighed in Vietnam in 1959. And it was all Darwinian, because we managed to kill so many rats with Agent Orange and napalm that the only rats that survived were these super rats. It was Darwinian. So, rats today in Vietnam are bigger thanks to chemical defoliants and poisons. And I was fascinated by this. So rats figure prominently in the research in the novel. My big concern before the pandemic when this book's coming out is, are the rats going to make people uncomfortable? But then I was reassured, because 2020 was the year of the rat. So I went all in on rats in January and February. I even bought a special, I always get a fountain pen for whatever tour I'm on, and that year, Cross did a beautiful Year of the Rat fountain pen. And I was so excited to go on tour with my Year of the Rat fountain pen. Obviously, rats were not the problem.
So I've listened to a lot of your books with the audio books. And actually, this can be a question for both of you, but as authors, do you have any input on any part of the audiobook process?
Oh, I turned off my microphone. I don't even know how to turn it on. You go first.
Okay, I'll go first. I don't have a lot of input. Kelly Gilday is my producer at Penguin Random House Audio and has been since The Night Strangers in 2011. And she's wonderful. She will usually give me 4 or 5 narrators who she thinks would be great. And we discuss whether it's a book that's going to have 1 narrator or 2 narrators or 3 narrators or 4, how many we're going to have, how many we want to have. I am thrilled when sometimes Kelly says, I think Grace Experience is right for this one. I love it when I have Grace Experience as the narrator because Grace Experience is my daughter. And the first of my books that she narrated, she was still in high school because it's narrated by a high school girl. Close your eyes, hold hands. And she crushed it. Won some awards, she's really good at it. Obviously, Kelly doesn't use her when it's inappropriate. It's when Grace is the right voice, but I'm just thrilled. But I also loved Mark Bromhall, his reading of Skeletons of the Feast, I think is just epic. All of the 4 narrators I had for Secrets of Eden are glorious. When Alison Fraser or Cassandra Campbell are narrating one of my books, I'm over the moon happy. And I listen to a lot of other people's audiobooks too. Ready to go?
Do you listen to a lot of audiobooks? I do choose my readers now, the past few books. You had another question.
I just love your spirit. I just love, you have such enjoyment out of both of you, all of this, which comes through in the books. But my question is, you said you have done so many books recently. Are they all in your head at the same time? I have this idea of this character over here going, no, I'm next, and then this one goes over here. How do you put these all together? Are they like, how do they land in the typewriter? It's just, what is the process?
It's so funny that you should say, how do they land in the typewriter? And I do love the question, because I was actually, last week, really bored. And I was laughing with my wife about, maybe I need to change it up and buy a manual Smith Corona. I wrote on that. And as my wife pointed out to me, you realize, don't you, that you are going to have to retype it into a computer. You can't farm that out. I know you. You would never allow someone to do that. And I realized, okay, so we won't do that. So yeah, I am very linear. I don't begin a book until I have gotten my editor's notes and done a second draft on a book.
You mean on the previous book?
On the previous book, yeah. Yeah. So there is a period when I might be doing a 3rd or 4th or 5th draft on a book when I'm writing my first draft of the next book. Likewise, in the era of the paperback book tour, that was really weird. Because I'd be talking about a book that had come out a year ago and I'd probably finished 3 years ago, and I've got a new book coming out next year I'm excited about, and I've got a hardcover that came out, 5 or 6 months ago. That was demanded a level of compartmentalization that was epic.
Well, but also, Chris, because your books are quite different from each other. It's not like you're writing a series of, books that are all related. You've got so many different locations and characters, perspectives. You were telling me you've written 2 books in the second person, which I did not realize. Is that true? Who does that? I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. That's very hard, by the way. Very hard to pull off.
Unless it's a cookbook. Or it's about,
That's true.
or it's about engine maintenance.
Was it?
No. But, I mean, my 2 favorite second-person books or stories off the top of my head are Jay McInerney's classic, Boy Likes Big City, and Pam Houston's magnificent short story, Cowboys Are My Weakness.
Yeah. Also, Lori Moore has a great second-person story.
Oh, does she?
Oh, it's incredible. Do you remember the net title of it? It's in Like Life. It's wonderful.
I will tell you that I love it, but my readers don't. When you look at my readers' response to the second person of The Night Strangers, it is unbelievably humbling.
Interesting. That's fascinating.
Thank you. I walked in here not realizing how much I would love this. I love historical fiction and I love that you are so productive as a writer, but I'm also descended from the Van Meters that started in Monmouth County, New Jersey before they went to West Virginia. So for me, I'm curious, how much does the slice of history called genealogy figure either in the Jackal's Mistress or some of your other historical fiction?
What is your name?
Not Van Meter.
No.
Oh, Michelle Krigman. It's
So, we have to talk. But
they left in the 1700s for West Virginia, so. But there are Van Meters in Monmouth County right now.
how much did you know about your ancestor Betty Van Meter's story?
Nothing. There's an Elizabeth Van Meter, but she's like 2 generations above. I haven't been able. I was sitting here on Ancestry DNA trying to find the Van Meters. That's what I was doing during
Okay,
this.
I'm gonna give you my card, and we can talk, and I can tell you what I know, and where to look for more about Betty Van Meter.
It didn't need to be just the Van Meters. I was just curious how much genealogy can figure into historical fiction, just a more general look.
Genealogy can figure a ton, but I will tell you that, and Christina and I have talked about this, a little research goes a long way, a little genealogy goes a long way. So for example, The Sandcastle Girls is a love story set in the midst of the Armenian genocide. I'm a grandson of 2 survivors of the Armenian genocide. I could have written a memoir, or about my grandparents and what they survived, but no one would have read it. And I used very, very little of their story in The Sandcastle Girls because I wanted to do something bigger that people would read. And one of the joys about historical fiction, and you can really see it in The Orphan Train, is you can write about a moment in history that if you were writing nonfiction, very few people would read. But if you write it as historical fiction, people will learn about it and love it, and it's just wonderful, which is one of the reasons why I love historical fiction. Millions of people around the world know about the Armenian genocide now because of The Sandcastle Girls. Had I just done Levon Nazareth and Haig Bohjalian's story, no one would have read it.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm just wondering what each of you are reading right now.
Well, I just read this great book called Jackal's Mistress.
Thank you.
Absolutely riveting, could not put it down. Gosh, what have I read lately? In my writer's reading group, Alice Elliott Dark is here. We're in this wonderful group together. We're reading Stoneyard Confessional, which was a finalist for the Booker Prize by an Australian novelist. Charlotte Cook, is that her name?
Charlotte Wood.
Oh, Charlotte Wood, yeah. Which is very spare. It's kind of the opposite of this in a way. It's very, very slim. And it takes place pretty much in one room. But it's beautiful. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay, here are 3 books I've read in the last week that I really liked. Broken Country.
And you wrote a novel last week also.
2 weeks, over 2 weeks. Okay. I absolutely loved Broken Country. Is that Charlotte Wheeler Wells? And it's about a 1968. It's a love story set in 1968 in the 1950s in England, and it's really beautiful. I really enjoyed Deep Cuts by Holly Brinkley. If you like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, I would recommend diving into Deep Cuts. Same era, 3 young people. Instead of video game designers, they're songwriters. I just finished...
And that's new, right?
That's new.
Yeah.
Yep. And I just finished Amanda Montell's Cultish. Amanda Montell is fundamentally a linguist, and Cultish is so funny and so smart. Nonfiction, as she deconstructs the difference between...
I'm just going to say Broken Country is by Claire Leslie Hall.
Thank you.
As I'm a librarian, and I could not look it up.
That's why I love libraries so much. And
Cliche.
Cultish examines what is the difference between a death cult like Jonestown and, Angelique, forgive me, Soul Cycle. And that's what we get to, Cultish and Culty.
Okay, so one more question.
Oh. What's your name?
My name? I'm Judy.
Hi, Hi, Judy. Well, this is the last question.
Oh my gosh, thank you so
And we
much.
got one more tote bag I gotta give away.
Okay, so maybe we have to have 2 more questions.
Okay.
So first off, I was disappointed that Double Bind was not one of your 5 that you listed. But aside from that, when I was reading this, and you touched on this earlier, I found it interesting that you chose Libby, and it sounds like it was based on the original story, or the original episode, to be someone from Charlottesville, not the area that she was living in, and someone who had not grown up owning slaves. And I wondered if you had considered whether Libby could have actually grown up in that area and been from a family of slave owners, and whether that would have changed the way the story played out.
Good question. We don't know if Betty Van Meter's family owned slaves. We have no idea. We know that her husband's family had slaves and set them free and emancipated them. We don't know the precise moment when that happened, but my conjecture is based on some of the letters. It might have been between 1859, the nearby John Brown Rebellion in Harper's Ferry, and the start of the Civil War in 1861. But that is conjecture, but it also seemed to really bring to life my fictional version of Betty Van Meter, Libby Stedman, and my goal of making her even more of an outsider.
Okay, so one more question, and you get a tote bag. Who could resist this?
You know, there's no such thing as the canvas tote bag cannon. When I used to do t-shirts, I always wanted to bring a t-shirt cannon with me.
Hi, for both of you, I'm curious, what other loves, practices in your daily life contribute to the strength and craft of your writing?
We're here for you, Chris.
No. Christina is so talented, and she's like the Terry Gross of novelists. Amazing.
You're a very extremely easy
What's
subject.
the name of the book coming out September 1?
I have a thriller coming out. I'm co-authoring called Please Don't Lie with my friend Ann Burt. We both raised our children here in Montclair together, and then my novel The Foursome is coming out next May. Yeah. Okay.
What was the question?
So the other practices,
Other practices.
yes, and loves in your life that contribute to your craft.
I am so lucky. I have 3 amazingly smart women making my books better. My editor, Jenny Jackson, my daughter, Grace Experience, and my lovely bride, Victoria Bluer, who's read every single one of the 3.6 million words I published before they were published.
The detail I love that you say is that you got very lucky to have a spouse who wants to read in bed with you.
Yeah. Yep. We were in bed for hours together. And the great thing about Victoria is how candid and honest she can be with me, because we've been together since we were 18 years old. And once when clearly I was not taking some criticism well, she said to me, "Wouldn't you rather hear it from me than the New York Times or the Boston Globe?" I kind of would.
Good point.
Yeah. And I also, and this is the nuts and bolts of what I do. 7 or 8 months a year in Vermont, it is warm enough for me to bike. It's above 30 degrees, 35 degrees. And I will bike in the afternoons between 25 and 50 miles. And I will do it 5 or 6 days a week. And it's critical to my writing, because I clear my head, I think about what I'm going to write the next day. I will often stop, pull my cell phone out of my cycling jersey, and dictate, outline whole scenes for the next day that I'm going to write. And it's critical. I can't imagine doing what I do without riding my bike in the afternoon. Now, in the winter, I found that being in the woods with my beloved dog Jessie is almost as good. It's not quite as good, because I never clear my mind completely, because I'm just so filled with love for Jessie, and I want to make sure she's not eating deer shit.
So is the Lori Moore book Walking in another's shoes?
No, it's a story.
Self-help? There's,
It's the one about how to be a writer.
there,
I think most of the stories in that collection are
Yeah, it's
self-help.
right, right.
Yeah.
Self-help.
Pretend self-help.
Oh, it's not like life, it's self-help. How to be
How to be the other woman.
the other woman.
Which of course is second person, because second person is usually how-to books, how to scramble eggs, how to change a tire.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's written like that. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Ariel.